When one thinks of intelligence, one immediately thinks of IQ, and although IQ can deliver a pragmatic answer to a problem, it can often lack the human element encapsulated in emotional quotient. Good advisors can do both, with the role of advisors becoming more pronounced. What are they doing to understand and deal with clients' complex financial affairs, while at the same time remaining in touch with what really matters to a client? Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, you need to have a high emotional quotient and high emotional intelligence, because money is very related to emotion, and you need to be able to deal with both. And you need the tools and the skill. Kobe, set the scene for us.
I mean, I think you make valuable comments, but I think the one thing that is lacking in the industry is people's ability to connect with clients. So if you look across the asset management industry and you look at the advisory committee, community as well, there's sometimes the inability to kind of connect with a client. So it's all about the process. It's all about the numbers at the end of the day, but it's not really about how do I connect with this client. Emotionally, what is it that I need to be doing in order to understand this client better? Because everybody can follow the process. Everybody can sell a product at the end of the day. Everybody understands how to do that. But how do you emotionally connect with a client so that you can have a long-lasting relationship? And I suppose a second element to that is, how do you allow your relationship with a client not to become emotionally charged? Because once you're at that point, it becomes quite difficult to pull it back from that point.
And John, I'm sure trust plays a massive element within all of this. You've got to trust not only the organization, you have to trust the person that is picking the funds in which they're going to be investing in, right?
I think that's the most important skill of an advisor, is certainly establishing that trust element, which I think it's difficult to do without emotional intelligence.
Okay, well, with regards to building the skills and building, because trust is obviously earned, and we know this, how does one build trust over a short space of time? Because you don't have much time to, of course, secure the clients and then prove that they have their money in safe hands.
I think what's really important is to try and relate the money back to something. Money in isolation, money is a metaphor for what? Autonomy, freedom, peace of mind. I think one needs to relate it back to life. So once again, instead of speaking about money and returns and figures and that sort of thing, one needs to look at it in relation to how does it affect you and your situation. We've done a lot of work in the retirement space, and certainly we've shifted our entire business from a purely financial planning business, talking about money, into talking about retirement. And retirement's not all about money. There's a lot more to it.
Absolutely. Okay, so how does the quant get involved in this one?
Well, I'd like to maybe...
Because you're a numbers man, right? So
I am
it's
indeed.
all about IQ and not
This
EQ.
is all
Give
very confusing for me, but you're obviously going to have situations where a client trusts you and likes the service and won't go to somebody else because they like what they're getting. But at some point, if you don't deliver, they might, they might still like you, but they're going to go somewhere else, right? Or the other way around, where you are, there's a competitor of yours who delivers on the numbers but not on the emotional side of things, or not on the trust side of things, and they stick with that client. So there's sort of two sides to this debate where, IQ and EQ benefit to some extent the client, and maybe a blend is what's really necessary.
Yeah, I think that what's important from a sort of EQ point of view, from a is really looking at the setting the expectation. I think so little time is spent on setting the expectation. If you go into a pure equity unit trust fund, do you understand you could lose 30% of your money, and how would you feel? That positions that, and very often a person goes...
Which still could happen, but at least you've prepared the client.
Yes, that's right. So then when we come in a year's time and you have lost 30% of your money, the client's okay with it. You said it could happen, we've had a bad year. But where you haven't set that expectation, and that happens, then there's blood on the streets.
John, maybe take us through. I'm a brand new client of yours. Okay, I walk in your door and I say to you, John, I'd love for you to help me. Some of my friends have suggested that I come and speak to you. Take us through that kind of initial phase of what you go through with a client, because I want to understand what it is that you do in order to build trust with a client, in order to then have the financial discussion with a client, and then potentially have a numbers discussion with a client. What is it that you do?
I think most important as a starting point is to establish where our clients come from. We're looking back at their history. And the reason we do that is I mean, we've had experience where I've recommended a client goes into a form of equities, and they never came back to me. And I found out later down the track that their parents lost all their money in 1969 in the stock market crash, and they were never going to go near equities again. Now, once again, that's a process you have to take clients through to make sure they understand equities. So you can't just go out and tell them to go into equities if they've had a bad experience. So you need to understand their history. Then one needs to go around and understand the principles. How have they got to where they are today? Everyone's had good and bad experiences with money. and what are the best investment decisions you've made and the worst.
Isn't it also about goals? I mean, you mentioned that it's not just about money, it's about, you know, hopes and dreams and aspirations, and I suppose retirement really encapsulates all the hard work that you've done for many, many years leading up to that moment in your life. So it's almost as if you've got to ensure that you understand how important that goal is for the people that want to retire.
We refer to the bucket list on numerous occasions. I think, you know, once again, it's how have you got to where you are, what are you going through currently, and most importantly, where you're going. And that's really the goal-setting process. So we go through and really try and, you know, where clients planning to travel from a cash flow planning point of view, this is now IQ, cash flow planning point of view in retirement, maybe give some meaning to it and establish what that trip may be. All of a sudden a client can now relate that trip to a cruise in Alaska as opposed to a trip worth 100,000 Rand.
Kobie, what would you say some of the biggest mistakes are at this point? Because we know that a lot of clients are left disappointed because of, you know, dismal performances, and they take their money elsewhere. Is that a mistake? Whose mistake is that? Do you think that's the client, or do you think that it's the advisor that is just not doing their work properly to create a safe environment?
I think it's both, because I think on the one end, clients end up at advisors, and advisors advise clients, and they often look to advisors, you know, to be the kind of thought leaders in the area, which often advisors sometimes are not. You know, they're not market gurus necessarily. They're not people that know everything about markets. And I suppose education then therefore have to happen at a two-prong approach. The first thing is, if your client has to invest, make your client understand what it is they're investing in, what the ups and the downs are going to look like, potentially, and what are the risks associated with that, and then give them some books to go and read. Say to them, go and read about what you're about to embark on. And it's the same thing with the advisor. And so, you know, in my history with working with advisors and working with clients, I've seen both of those kind of elements. And often I start off by saying, educate yourselves. You know, read as much as you possibly can so you can understand the animal that you're dealing with.
Roland, on a global level, and we've seen people like Bernie Madoff and other pyramid schemes which have really left a lot of people burnt. And the truth of the matter is you follow someone that is engaging on the emotional quotient side of things, and saying that you can realize your dreams if you invest in us. But there's also a trust element within the brand. Tell us about how things are done globally, the trends that we're seeing after the market crash, and the fact that many people have been burnt.
Well, I think one of the negative sides of emotional quotient, which we must always be careful of, is, and there's a whole area of finance called behavioral finance, which focuses on things like overconfidence. We are often overconfident in our ability. So we would, and we're all guilty of this. So fund managers are overconfident in the fact that they can pick stocks. Advisors or investors are overconfident that they can pick the next good fund manager. And so we suffer from this self-delusion, right? We're all above average drivers. We're all above average in whatever we do. And that is a part of the bad part of emotional quotient that we've got to be careful of. So a lot of people that don't do proper risk analysis or dig deep with the numbers might get caught by a Madoff or some of these kind of schemes where it's just emotion driving it, or referrals or trust, which is obviously based on very thin ground. And we shouldn't compare everybody out there with a Madoff, but that's what contributed to that.
And it's wealthy investors that get caught. So it's people that are supposed to be knowledgeable about these things. They're people that have held big positions in business, and often they get caught in these things because predominantly, you know, maybe they just haven't read enough, maybe they just haven't done their homework enough. John, maybe a question for you. You know, when you get to a point where a client is emotionally charged for some rhyme or reason, how do you pull back on that? I mean, your client's now emotionally charged about something that's happened in the investment markets. You can see he's kind of cold towards you. You know, things are kind of going pear-shaped. What is that? Is that an opportunity for you guys at Chartered Wealth, or what is it that you do in that situation?
I think it's an opportunity to dig a little bit deeper. I mean, I've had the situation before. I've been confronted by a client over receiving an investment statement, and he didn't see what he wanted to see. And by digging a little bit deeper, I realised he's having a bad time with his wife because he's in the first 3 months of retirement, and being home every day is quite tough. So once again, if you dig a little bit deeper, you can establish all kinds of things.
So you're a psychologist.
and once again, if you look
I'm sure the dog was upsetting him and not his wife.
and once again, you know, the negative return, what does that mean to the client? If the market dropped 5% yesterday, what does that mean to the client? How does it affect him? And in most situations, it doesn't, because a few days later, it's back up again. But once again, it's the temporary emotions one has to deal with.
Is the biggest disappointment for the clients at this point, would you say, the fact that no money is being made or money is being lost? Is that the biggest driver of disappointments? It's an easy assumption to make, obviously.
Look, I mean, I think that through research done, people don't show as much. I mean, people don't like losing money, so it's exaggerated in the extreme compared to making money. I consider the client say you've made a 10% return and they're happy, but you say you've lost 10%, and you cannot believe the reaction. So they're not. They don't relate.
How do you take that news to them?
Well, I think once again, it's a temporary loss. Unless you've sold out of your unit trust out of the market, you haven't realised that loss. So it's a temporary thing. And as I generally speaking, within a week or two, especially based on the current market situation, you recover.
Roland, what kind of risks should clients be most concerned of?
I think, especially on the overconfidence side and also on the emotional side, I think we all make the same mistake and get disappointed by choosing managers based on past performance. It is probably the most common mistake made in the industry. We look at what has happened and we assume that what has happened is going to happen going forward. The best manager in the past is not necessarily the best manager going forward, and there's a lot of research to prove
that. That is how trust
exactly,
is built, though.
Exactly.
You can't deviate from that. It's
but
so
I think
hard.
people are disappointed when they choose managers on that basis and then find out that they actually do not get the results that they expect.
You know, you sit with clients, okay, and you say to clients, say an XYZ fund, and you say, how did you choose this fund? And it invariably always starts with, you know, I had a look at it, and it looks like it's performed well in the past, so therefore I chose it, you know. And you say, well, why is this a good investment? Do you believe this is a good investment? Yeah, no, look at the returns. The returns look pretty good to me. Or alternatively, they might say, no, the returns look dismal, I've made a mistake, you know. And do you believe that past returns are an indication of future returns? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but what else must I use? And it's true. That's why, you know, potentially in the financial planning space, in the advisory space, they need professional help in order to help them put together solutions.
This is what we do in Fund Focus, the second part of the show. We actually focus on a fund, we take a look at how it's been performing, and we try and forecast how it's going to perform down the line. So we're actually guilty of it here.
Correction actually. What we are looking at is we're trying to understand the fundamentals that have driven the fund in the past, because those fundamentals, if it's the same fund managers that are going to be driving the process, maybe those fund managers will make exactly the same, will have the same pros and cons effects on the fund.
I think we also look at the risks rather than just the returns, and that's what most people do, is they just look at returns, and that's not the way to pick a fund.
Absolutely. I mean, risks play a very integral part in that. Are there any clients that you've turned away, John?
Absolutely.
Because okay,
I mean, you get
quick answer. Tell us.
You do get the clients, and typically it's the accountants and the actuaries type who are purely left brain.
The quant type.
Yes, some people are so clever they're stupid, and in many cases we get people who do. They come in, all they want to do is talk about numbers and figures, and that they don't want to divulge any of the rest of their lives, sort of thing. And once again, you very quickly realise that you're not going to be able to keep this guy happy.
And then you tell them kindly and politely. How do you deal with that conversation? What is it? What is
I think
the
once
message
again,
you put across?
He refers them to me.
Yeah, we told them to find a money manager.
Okay. Maybe just a quick question for John. John, once you've now gone through kind of the EQ part with clients, and you've kind of understood about their lives and what it is that drives them. Let's assume I'm a client. My parents, like you quite rightly said beforehand, was burnt in the equity market, and you know I want absolutely nothing to do with equities. But I need a certain rate of return beyond inflation, so I can't necessarily get there through just kind of bonds and cash. I've got money globally, I've got money locally, maybe I've got money in you know all over the show. What are the big considerations to kind of get me to a point in order to now start looking at numbers and understand the financial kind of implications of what I'm doing and what my belief set is?
Well, I think once you've established what the client's needs are and goals and all those sort of things, one can then work out what a client would need during their lifetime as a return to make sure the money lasts longer than they do. And really, you know, through that process, we develop a long-term investment strategy, which may be targeting to beat inflation by 4%. And we then go to an independent investment consultant, and they put together a portfolio for us that will ensure that we achieve that over the term of the investment. So it's all long-term, and everybody comes away with an investment strategy, which is
and obviously tax is very important in that as well. So
tax
mitigating tax to the lowest point where it's continues to be legal, but that you're maximising the returns at the end of the day.
And that's the planning process.
Yeah. Okay, John, we have to wrap things up. So just the last comment from you with regards to EQ versus IQ, and how the two actually play a very important part in what you do on a day-to-day basis.
I think one needs to, as I mentioned, give your money meaning. Don't talk about it in isolation, and look at what does it mean. At the end of the day, if you
happiness, right?
If you happiness, freedom, autonomy. Yeah.